Hi, everybody. This is Joe Illick. I'm the artistic director of Fort Worth Opera. Tonight is the inaugural program of our Fort Worth Opera Salon. And tonight I have a wonderful, distinguished panel of friends and guests, all of whom are very important in the opera world in different ways. I'd like to introduce all of them to you. First of all, Francesca Zambello, who is the artistic director at Washington National Opera, the artistic director and general director of Glimmerglass Opera, and a magnificent director who's done work around the United States and the rest of the world for the last 35 years. Missy Mazzoli, composer based in Brooklyn, also teacher and the composer of Proving Up, the composer of Breaking the Waves, the composer of Salt, the composer of Songs from the Uproar, and I believe there are some other works coming up that you can tell us about. I've read about them. Karen Slack, fantastic soprano who sings around the world, and also recently the artistic advisor to Portland Opera. So I'm eager to hear about that. Karen, I don't know as much as I'd like to about what that whole position means and how you're reshaping that. And Loren Meeker, who also is a director and the general director of Opera San Antonio. So we probably don't have enough time on this program to cover all the many things we could talk about. One thing that I noticed as I emailed all of you is that you're all interested in storytelling in different ways. So I think we'll start off just by talking a little bit about how the act of storytelling most appeals to you and how it connects with what you do, either when you're singing on an opera stage or directing on an opera stage or composing for the opera stage. Jessica, can I hand this over to you?
Well, I mean, I think knowing all of these artists and having worked with all of them in many different guises, I know that they're all committed to, as we say, storytelling as a place to start. And that means whether it's how a character sounds or looks or acts or is. And I think that's one of the great things about us is that we each have very individual voices and that we represent them on stage in many different ways. So I'm honored to be with this group. I really respect everybody, and a lot of them are we're pretty good friends. So it's great that we're all pursuing that. But I think storytelling now has to take on a broader sense, a better context, really. It means, how do we tell stories in our time? And what does it mean in this time? And I don't just mean now in, the height of greatest change, certainly in my life, but I'd say, in the last 20 years and then in the next 20 years, how are we going to connect the world around us with the art form that each of us love very, very much and want to find our own ways to keep it thriving? It's not going to be what it was before, so we have to find the new stories.
And how has your way of telling stories changed over the years?
That's difficult. I mean, I think that for me, when I started out, I was definitely in a field by myself. I know this is going to air in Women's History Month. And so we're just leaving Black History Month and coming into Women's History Month. So I think it's so important. When I began, there were not role models. There were not other women directors. There were not women administrators. There were very, very few. And so I was figuring out, why are we doing all these operas about women that are being told by like Traviata and Salome? And I mean, just things that were so profoundly about women. So maybe there's other ways to view these stories. And that doesn't mean reinterpreting them, but that just means interpreting them perhaps from a perspective that comes from a different soul. And so I think that was my starting place. And of course, over doing this for 40 years, things change a lot. And I've realized the potency in the last decade and have pretty much committed myself to most stories somehow making some social connection in some way, whether small or large, or touching audiences in a way that makes them think. And that's, I think, one of the wonderful things about opera and music is that the content is so rich. And we can use our content to constantly be holding up a mirror to society, to having new voices like Missy. I'm obviously a composer of great importance in our time, and finding ways to speak and make people listen in a different way.
Loren, I'm going to jump over to you. When you direct a show, do you find yourself as a woman interpreting things differently than the interpretations you might have seen growing up when male directors would tell us how Violetta felt or how Mimi felt?
You know, I certainly always interpret it from my perspective at any given point in time. So even the way I directed, say, a Bohème 3 years ago would be different than how I would direct it now, based on my life experience and the artists and group who are creating a production with me. What Francesca says really resonates with me in the sense of using viewpoints and using who we are today to be able to tell stories that impact our community in the most positive way possible. I happen to not be a man interpreting this material. I happen to be me. So that will always be the viewpoint through which I work with my collaborators. And I think it's a real gift to be able to be an industry where collaboration and serving the community and looking at ways to tell stories that can have the biggest impact is at the core of what we do. So that will always be at the forefront of my work as a director, as a general director, and everything in between.
And are there traditional works that you find resonate with today's public more than others?
Yes and no. And I think, again, it depends a little bit on the time period and the specific community that you're serving. But I can certainly say that for me as an artist, there are pieces throughout my lifetime as a stage director that have resonated more or less with me based on where I am as a human in my growing process. And I think that's true even when you look at the traditional canon. That's why some pieces sort of resonate and go up and down the scale of popularity, is because what we're drawn to within our communities, we find different values in different pieces at different times. And that's what I sort of love about our art form, is that it's not a static, one interpreted way and then done, that we will constantly evolve, whether that's evolving our perspectives on traditional operas or having wonderful artists like Missy who are birthing new pieces into the canon for us to consider and carry the art form forward.
Talk to us, Missy. When you think about the next piece you want to write, are you thinking of a specific kind of story you want to find, or does it just grab you out of the blue?
You know, I mean, it's different for every piece. I find myself gravitating towards some similar themes over the course of my career. I find that most of my operas center around a woman's story. So there'll be a woman sort of at the center of the opera, and in my mind, the opera is sort of about her. Whether that's in a really obvious way, as in Breaking the Waves, where you have this woman at the center of the story, or in a not so obvious way, like Proving Up, which, thank you, Francesca, commissioned originally by Washington National Opera. Very grateful. You know, and I think of that, you know, my favorite character in that opera is the mom, you know, and so this for me, the story really revolves around her. She's trying to maintain order through these obsessive domestic chores, even though really the power of decision-making in that family, you know, this is taking place in 1868 in a homestead. So the power of decision-making is held with the men in that family. So, you know, I'm always looking for something, I'm interested in stories about middle-aged women in impossible situations. I'm interested to see how they get out of them. My next opera, which is for Norwegian National Opera and Opera Philadelphia and Chicago Lyric Opera, is called The Listeners. And it's about a woman who finds herself, she's sort of a suburban soccer mom who finds herself entangled in a cult. And in the end,
Jordan's story.
Jordan Tannehill's story, Canadian playwright who developed it specifically for this opera. So this will be the first time this story is happening in the world. You know, but I was fascinated to see how this woman got herself out of this cult. And in the end, she actually ends up taking over the cult. And, you know, how does that how does that happen? So those stories are very interesting to me. I think a level of magic and a sort of surreal element to the story is always great. I find opera extremely surreal. Everyone's singing all their thoughts, every single one of them. Like, we are not in reality, and I enjoy operas that sort of embrace that element and use it as an opportunity to sort of bring us, in a way, bring us actually closer to the truth by feeding it to us in this magical, exaggerated way.
So, Karen, I want to ask you a question that might sound rhetorical, but it's not. You're the only one of us who actually gets out on the stage and makes all of this happen. What do you do when you have the words and the music and the story, and at the moment it's just dots on a page, to turn it into the fantastic performances that you give? What's that process for you personally?
It's a lot of things. It's tears, it's wine, it's it is marking my score up like a map in pencil, all kind of colors. It's all of those things. And not only do I have to learn the notes, I have to memorize, and then I have to have an idea, a vision of what I want to see, what I want to feel in the stage, what I want the audience to feel. I have to have day one come with the director to have some kind of context and thought about who I am portraying, and it's a lot of different things. I used to, when I first started, Francesca's known me since I was 22 years old. I'm 45 now. I have no problem with saying my age because I look good. So, like,
You do look good.
I used to just go music, 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 music. And as I have developed and matured as an artist, I'm like, oh no, words, text, subtext, subject matter, everything that's going on around me, what happened before and what happens after, to me is the most important now. And so it's such a journey of lifting the black notes off the white page to make them breathe into the air, into the space.
You ever get surprised and have one idea and then walk into a situation with other singers and a director and a conductor, and suddenly the character becomes something quite different from what you'd originally imagined?
Yes. But I am a sponge and I'm very open, and I just go, okay, well, let me shift, let me pivot, let me try to figure out how I can navigate and negotiate my way into what I want to do and what the director wants.
Yeah.
That's a dance as well, right? You only learn that by doing, but discovering mid performance is a thing. Discovering mid run, discovering after you've done a role a lot, which I've done. Cheska's Porgy, Serena, now seven productions, 7 times, 8 times, I don't know, more than that, but you know what I mean, the production. She's very different than when I did it for the first time, and singing Aida or Trovatore, wherever it is, but finding out midway through that this person is not who you thought it was 5 times ago. It's very magical for me.
Let's talk about audiences for a minute. Cheska, when you conceive your seasons for the future, do you think largely about the audience or largely about the vision that you want to put out there and hope that the audience can just get along and run with it?
There's a great level of pragmatism that goes into planning for listeners. I mean, of course, we all have like dream seasons and dream casts and dream pieces we want to commission. If I put completely on the stage all the time what I wanted, it might not sell enough tickets, and there's a big reality out there, which I think people have to realize is, when you plan a season, it's like a dim sum platter. You've got to make sure that you've got enough options to draw people to come see you. And now, but of course, before the revolution of our time and before the pandemic, we were already on a downhill spiral in this business. So we were already trying to reinvent. Now we really have to, rebirth, like give birth to so many new things but also figure out how to keep the things that have meaning to us. And so, planning a season, the days of like, oh, okay, let's do a tent pole here, a tent pole here. A tent pole is, Aida Bohem Carmen.
Yeah.
And then, oh, let's do one commission, and blah, blah, oh, let's have a theme around this for the season. Those days are like history. That's like PC, pre-COVID.
If you had somebody say, we're going to bankroll you from here to next year, what dream season of 4 operas would you like to put on?
But that's not the thing, Joe, to be truthful, because you want to create audiences. And if we were, okay, sure, I'm going to commission, I don't even want to mention composers because there's so many great ones now, but there's so many great artists. Of course. Yeah. Like, a season of all new works and, the Trojans and War and Peace and the Ring Cycle. Sure. But it's more about, like, how am I going to create audiences? How am I going to keep audiences, and how am I going to bring in new audiences, and how am I going to do works that are going to speak to an audience? So being bankrolled, I'm not going to say no to the person. Let me see if I can find them. Let me know you're in Texas. Let me know. But it's more about how are we going to create the future together? That's what it's about. It's like, I'm thinking about what's going to be here when I'm not doing this job, because these jobs are like give backs. Once you, like, having been a freelance director for years and then taking leadership positions, for me it's all about give back. So how am I going to give back to young artists or emerging people or mentoring people or creating new audiences or making kids part of opera or bringing opera out in different places? So Joe, let me have that donor, and then let me see if I can adapt them to another way of thinking.
Okay.
But thank you. You're in Texas. Let me know. Okay.
Oh yeah, Missy, when you think of the pieces that you're about to write but haven't written yet, do you think in this way too? Do you think about trying to connect as much as you can with audiences, or for you is it more let the audience come to you?
I'm absolutely thinking about the audience. I mean, you have to be able to connect with an audience. Otherwise, what's the point of doing the show at all? But I also have to trust that, what moves me in a deep and profound way will move others. And, it's also every piece you write is always a conversation with the company. I mean, these things are too expensive and involve too many people for it to be just something that I dream up and I'm the only one who thinks it's a good idea. I mean, that would never happen. So it's always in collaboration with the company and by extension, the community that company is in. And I'm always looking for ways to create work that is of our time. What is resonating with what people are thinking about now. Certainly Proving Up, the piece that began at Washington National Opera, is a great example. I mean, I thought of that sort of in the wake of the recession in 2008, and was interested in writing a piece about the American dream. And so when Francesca came to me with this commission to write for the AOI, so the American Opera Initiative program that they had, I was like, oh, this is perfect. And then I started writing it after the 2016 election. So everything that was going on in the world, I felt like I was able to filter through the experience of this family of fictional doomed homesteaders. And so in that way, I was creating the piece with today's audience in mind.
When you have these pieces, often for you, they're commissioned by several companies. There are multiple, commissioners. So do you in fact work with all of them as the work develops to say, how are you feeling about the way this is turning out?
Yes, absolutely.
Really?
And often there are different casts. There'll be a slightly different take. Sometimes there are different directors and totally different productions with each company. For Proving Up, it started in Washington. Obviously huge resonance there with like the American dream and government and everything that's going on. And then it went on to Opera Omaha, and the story takes place in Nebraska. So the work had a totally different resonance happening on the spot where literally the earth where this story could have actually happened.
Yeah.
And many people in that audience, had not too distant relatives who were homesteaders or still had land in their family that was acquired as part of the Homestead Act. So every place had a very different kind of personal resonance.
I want to say Missy gets, if I may, gets A
Please.
plus on composer collaboration with companies. I've worked on probably 100 new operas in my career, ranging from 20 minutes to very, very long. And there's a handful of great composers and great collaborators. And I would put Missy in that. But I do think it's about that mixture of collaboration, but also coming from a personal place. Because I think for all of us, Karen, Loren, you, Joe, the composer, they're like, Karen used the word the map, they create the map and we interpret it, we read it, we try and move it to the next thing. So I just want to say, of course I can't talk about all the, terrible collaborations or people, where you've tried to reason with people. And that's the thing about operas, it's like we've all said the words, community, collaboration, ensemble, that's the weird, magical, and amazing thing about this art form. I'm sorry, I just had to jump in because
That's great.
I don't think Missy is really good at that.
Yeah. It's no secret to anybody that this is a difficult and divisive time in our country. And I'm not sure that there's ever been a time when people said, oh, everything is great right now. But as we do what we do, how much do each of you hold it in your heads that we have a possibility to bring people closer together, that we really can help create unity with the art that we put on stage, whether as a singer or a director or composer? Anybody jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I'll shut up in a minute, but I mean, it's like I always say we are here to be a bridge. There are so many disparate people, and whether it's new works, the Proving Up, or when we commissioned Blue, these are pieces that are like speaking to now. But I also feel like commissioning like a lot of works for kids. I'm talking about like kids, that make them think about like the environment or, important social issues. That's what's so great is that we've got an art form that stretches, and it is, it's like now, can we program Don Giovanni? Can we program Rigoletto? How are we going to get audiences to that? How do we program again Porgy and Bess? These are like things that we're going to have to figure. Like, so if we can't program those pieces, we better find all the Missy Mazzolis in the world to give us new repertory. And that's one of the great things about the flowering of repertory in America, particularly in the last 25 years, is the amount of really interesting composers working and speaking our voices that allow people to connect and have dialogue with each other.
I'm sure we'll keep performing Rigolettos and Don Giovannis. Loren, I know you do traditional works in San Antonio, right?
Yeah. What's interesting, the whole conversation is quite interesting, and I'll use an aha moment, for example, from my own experience here in San Antonio, even before I became the general and artistic director. We did a production of Tosca that I directed here a year ago, last fall, and at the second performance was our invited student night. And we got into the end of Act 2. I'm giving away the cards if anybody hasn't seen Tosca. But Tosca stabbed Scarpia, and in my staging twice. And the first time there was an audible gasp and applause, and the second time there were bravos and other vocalisms that were thrown in. And there was then a lot of conversation at the intermission after that I was listening to both in the student groups that were sort of conglomerating in the lobby and with the adults or more consistent sort of patrons that Opera San Antonio had at the time. And what was really fascinating was that the patrons, the supposed opera lovers, in some cases hadn't seen a Tosca. I've got a community here that hasn't seen a lot of the War Horses yet. And the students, that was true for as well, but their perspectives on the situation were so different. The adults were experiencing for the first time in feeling very polite in their seats. The students were having a big like Me Too movement, yay, you get him sort of moment that was quite vocal. And so
the audience is just the best in the world.
Thank goodness for students, right? So that actually fostered this really interesting conversation throughout the company and the community about how different groups can react to different pieces. Now, you can't just bubble it into war horses, right? Every show is going to have its own pros and cons and ways that it needs to be approached. But I do think there will be a balance between looking at pieces that resonate in different ways and how to keep those in the seasons as we move forward, in addition to really surging ahead and blossoming with new works and making that an equal and important vocabulary for companies across the board.
Do you do musicals in San Antonio?
We do not. We have yet to venture into that territory. Doesn't mean it's not a glimmer in the back of my brain, having learned from folks like Francesca, you know.
You've been wonderful about that. You've treated music theater and opera like they all belong on the same stage in the same season, and your audiences obviously feel the same way.
I think that, you know, musicals in some ways are America's first operas, the same way that, you know, jazz and blues and gospel have created our musical language. I mean, our musical language is now, finally, I feel like we have the freedom to express ourselves with an American voice that has culled so many of these different things. And I do think, look, of course, you know, when you program West Side Story, you definitely, with opera singers and dancers, you know, look, it's not like it does extremely well, but I'm pretty proud that things like Appomattox that I've programmed and Blue, you know, have really sold out in big opera houses, you know, and that's, you know, to me, when you've created audiences that are willing to see all of that's thrilling. I mean, I've sat through Breaking the Waves, I remember, in a performance in New York City that was totally sold out. It was like I had to sell something to get a ticket, you know, like my arm to get a ticket. So there are a lot of audiences. Again, you know, are they always in urban places? No, sometimes they're in places that you don't expect. And again, it goes back to that thing of, I was like that donor, you have to create your audience, create your community.
Karen, you've sung Aida and all the traditional operatic roles, but I know you've also, shall we say, crossed over and done things in a much more popular vein. Do you feel there's any difference, or is it all just communicating?
I think it's all communicating. Listen, for me to sit here and pretend like the vocal tools that you need to sing Aida translates into singing Fire Shut Up in My Bones or Dead Man Walking or whatever the other roles that I've gotten the chance to do. And by the way, I love new works because I feel like the shackles of tradition are thrown out of the window and I can do what my heart and my throat want to do. And so I remember the first time I talked to John, oh my gosh, conductor John Demain about my love for new works. And I got that through chamber music. I didn't necessarily get it through opera because people weren't calling me to do it. And he's like, "You like new work?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I love it." And so I am fortunate to live in both of those spaces, and I do have to navigate vocally, you know, a little bit. I have to shift because the same kind of vocal requirements for a big, say if I'm singing in Washington National Opera in that big space at the Kennedy Center where I'm having to produce a very large sound, you know, over the orchestra through the house is not always required in new American works. It's about something different, you know, which is amazing. As an artist, you get to color and shade and use different tools in your toolbox. And so I count it as a blessing.
Can you color and shade the same way when you are in a 3,000 seat house having to sing over a giant orchestra?
You can, you should. Do you always? No. You know, but it is different. The pianissimo in a very exposed, orchestra with a different thing. It's a very, in a smaller space is a different pianissimo. I have to sing mezzo forte, but in the big theater, it sounds different, and the coloring and all of the use, manipulating the breath and all those technical things that you have to do. But, and I sort of gotten away from thinking about singing as like mezzo forte, pianissimo, and all these, and sort of with color and shading and thought, emotion. That's what those things are. So when you take away all the technical things and start to shift your thinking as a storyteller, it just is it's a different world. It's a different world for me. The way I make music over the last 15 years, I'm different.
Well, it's great that we all change, right? It would be boring if we stayed the same. So Missy, I know you're a pianist and a teacher and a great composer, but I don't think you're a singer, right? And yet you seem to have an instinct, an intuition how to write for the voice that just sounds so true and works in people's voices. Is that just great ears, or how did you come to that?
Well, thank you. I am a terrible singer. I can't carry a tune. Like, it's hilarious. Like, I'll try to sing things in workshops and the singers are like, stop, just stop. I got it. And, but I think that's why I'm so interested in opera. And that's why I dedicated myself really in a very hardcore way to studying the repertoire when I first started writing opera. And this was really, I have to give a shout out to Opera Philadelphia, where I was composer in residence. And I spent the first year of that residency not writing any opera, but just studying works, and sitting in on every rehearsal they had and talking to every director who came through and just like seeing what worked and then what didn't work. And so that was a huge education, and that's really what led me to this. But I also think that, I draw inspiration from human beings. So, some composers are really inspired by nature, and that's great for them. But I am not. Like, all my inspiration comes from the wacky and weird and manipulative and beautiful things that human beings feel and think and do. And there's always been sort of this narrative thread to my work and this storytelling, even in the purely instrumental works. So when I discovered opera for myself, it was like coming home. I was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I remember a year into that residency with Philadelphia, I really had this, it was like a flash. I was talking to the director, Daniel Fish, and I was like, this is what I've been longing for, is like to talk to directors and to talk about the psychology behind the role. And I love all of that stuff so much. So it's been a great fit for me. And I think that it's a pleasure to like dedicate myself to working really hard on these operas.
Can you remember what the first opera you ever heard was that just made all the lights go on and you just thought, oh my God, this is incredible?
Well, so, when I was 19, I saw my first opera. It was Wozzeck at the Met in 1999. And I bought a ticket but sat in the last row. Like, I didn't know how to do like rush tickets or anything. And I remember I could like touch the ceiling. Like, there's that row in the Met where you're so far up, you can actually touch the ceiling. And I was just like, this is amazing. Like, this is everything that I want in art. But I didn't think that opera for me was possible at that point. I was just like, this is too big. I don't know even where to begin. You barely even learn, I think it's changing, but in conservatory at the time as a composer, you rarely learn a lot about how to write for the voice. And you certainly don't learn about how to start writing an opera. I think it's often just seen as something that's too massive to teach. So I just didn't see a path forward. And it really wasn't until Opera Philadelphia came along with their composer in residence program that I really felt that it was something I had to do. But yeah, Wozzeck all the way.
So in your Luna program, are you working with those composers to be able to write well for the voice?
Sorry, in my Luna Composition Lab?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Luna Composition Lab, it's the program that I run for female, non-binary, and gender non-conforming composers in their teens. So they're very young. They're really at the beginning of their compositional journeys. And they are the ones who come to us and like, I want to write an opera. It's like, I don't have to push them in that direction. And we always take them, we have a festival every year and we take them for a backstage tour of the Met. Last year they met Peter Gelb, and I was like, congratulations, you've done what every composer takes decades to do. You got a meeting with Peter Gelb. And so they're really coming to us like wanting to write for voice. So this year in our festival, we're having a workshop with Janine Tesori, and working on having workshops with singers. So the interest is there. And I think that's because there's been this like real shift in American opera. I see it over the last 20 years where it's become very popular and so many more composers are interested in writing it.
I mean, we found, just if I could jump in, in Washington, we have a program called American Opera Initiative where we commission 3 composers and librettists, and the importance on the word and the stories, but to write 20-minute operas. Like, you got to tell a story. And the only thing that when we started the program, which now we've done 30 operas, so it's 10 years old, that I said as a stipulation was it must be an American story. It must be, I don't want something based on European something. I want it to come, I don't care where and how, but somehow American. And I think giving people like, same thing, like you've got to write 20 minutes and tell a story and develop characters, because developing a character, through text and music, that's where that's where it all comes from, is knowing those people. And I was just sitting here looking at this group thinking it's so interesting because like Karen knows the character from this way, Loren and I know it this way, Missy this way, you Joe that way, it's so interesting. And then it's all does have to come like together. And I do think when you ask Karen about singing, I was like, in the end, I always think, oh my God, they're up there and I'm not. And it's like, how stressful is that? I'm sitting out here with a stomach ache, but it's more stress on them. But I do think the short pieces has proven so important, and so many of those composers have gone on to get commissions, and we're actually launching a new program that's in the same vein, but I can't talk about it yet. But I think that the opportunities to give people chances to write nuggets is really valuable, and with an orchestra and singers.
Yeah, how great is that? Yeah. But Karen, I'm going to guess that even though it's incredible pressure, you love that moment when you walk out on the stage and it's all on you.
Well, you know it because you've conducted me. So
I just had the feeling you were.
No, listen, it is a lot of pressure, and it is a lot of I always have to talk with myself before I walk out. Like, girl, you asked for this. You said you wanted to do it. You signed the contract. It's always like, can I turn around and go out the back door? I mean, come on. Like, I'd be a fool. I'd be fake if I didn't, express that. And, but when I'm out there and I'm doing the thing and the moments are happening, especially when I sing repertoire that I've listened to the legends sing, like the first time I got a chance to do Tosca, first of all, I couldn't do the murder. I couldn't do the jump. I was all nervous. I got all like, oh my God, I freaked out, whatever. But the first time I got a chance to stand there and do Visitarte, an aria that I had listened to since I was 14 years old. I mean, I'm emotional thinking about that. I even got a chance to do this. Like, my God.
I do know, actually, yeah.
Yes, you know.
I was a kid when I heard the first Salome I ever heard. I was 13 or 14. And it imprinted on me the way that Wozzeck did on you, Missy. And then when I got to conduct it for the first time, it was just an incredible experience. And
yeah. Oh, the first time I heard the triumphal scene and I was in rehearsal, the first time I got to do Aida, and I'm just weeping. I'm weeping because I remember being a kid in North Philly with the Leontine Price CD, blasting it. And then I get a chance to be that. That is, and to be me, a Black girl from North Philly. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy.
It's
amazing.
But that's one of the amazing things about opera, I think, is that when you look at the incredible diversity of people working in this field, and I don't just mean in America, I mean like so often working abroad, I always think, God, I'm in a rehearsal room and there are like 10 nationalities and really different, economic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, educational backgrounds, and we're all gathered around, the Bible, the score, and we're trying to figure it out together. that's one of the great things, because we're not bound by language. You know, you can be working with people who have completely different backgrounds and don't even, you know, I mean, that's when I think, you know, and people come from everywhere. That's what, one of the things I love so much is the sort of and that's, it goes back to like, if we can build the bridges in the rehearsal room, we can build them outside.
Oh, amen. I hope that that's true.
Well, singers also are direct ambassadors, right? We are the face. We are the first line of defense, you know, as they say, in a way. And so many of us have experienced that bridge gap, that, you know, particularly when you were talking about artists of color, like we are what each other sees, and even to aspire to be that thing, right? You know, but I hope that everyone who don't look like me see me and say, I can do it. I want to be there. I want to be in the audience to support her. I mean, listen, you know, Francesca, when she was directing many years ago at Santa Fe, when I was a young artist, dialogues of the Carmelites. Again, I could not do the murder. She told me, go sit down over there. I couldn't do the beheading. And I would cry all the time. And she's like, okay, tomorrow you got to do it. So I have a thing with, like, you know, that.
Oh my God, I forgot that. I forgot.
Yeah, tomorrow.
I remember that now. I remember in the rehearsal. Oh my God.
But I got to see Francesca as a leader, as someone, I'm like, I want to be like her someday. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, I didn't see it around me. And I'm like, you know, I for very early on, I knew I wanted to be on the other side of the table. Like, I didn't want to teach voice, and I can do that. That's fine, whatever. I wanted to be a change maker. I wanted to have the microphone. I wanted to, you know, make the decisions and do all of those things. So it's just, so representation to me is important beyond just like race in this business. You know, it is, I want to be that thing, you know?
So talk about Portland for a minute. How are you being that thing with your artistic advisor position?
Well, Sue Dixon called me on the phone. I never sung at Portland. I didn't know who Sue was, but she reached out to me and said, I see what you're doing. I hear that you're a leader, you know, and your industry people respect you. And would you come and advise? And I'm like, what does that mean? I didn't even know, you know, I wasn't even thinking, my mind wasn't thinking about that. And so when she told me she had been following me, and through this COVID time, because in this situation now we've gone to panels and we've gone through, you know, all these discussions, and, you know, I have emerged as an influencer, as a leader, because of the platform that I built with Kiki Conversations, and I get to talk to artists and I get to also express myself. And so she saw me as a leader and gave me an opportunity to be on the other side, to be a part of the casting, to be a part of production, choosing and, you know, deciding what new works get commissioned or what we're going to, you know, do in the future. And she gifted me a wonderful opportunity, and to sing, and to, you know, to do all these things. And so,
well, that was a win-win. They're lucky to have you.
Well, we have a good time.
Loren, do you plan, even with COVID going on, what will happen in the next season and the next 3 seasons?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's not that there aren't multiple contingency plans that go with even what my
A, B, C, D, E, F, and G.
Basically, yes. I mean, there are strategic plans around budgeting based on how COVID evolves, and then artistic plans around how COVID evolves as well. But it's been a goal of mine since I started here at Opera San Antonio to start encouraging the company and moving the needle forward on thinking more than one show out. And there's a balancing act, right, between how many seasons you really, when it's too many seasons out versus the right amount to be looking at and shifting the cards, but constantly evaluating what's happening in the world and in my community, and how to tell the right kind of stories in each season is part of what we look at aggressively from year to year to really analyze and make sure we're headed in a healthy direction.
Do people in the audience give you lots of feedback? You get phone calls, you get emails. We love this, we hated that.
Oh, yeah. Look at Cheska reacting. Yes. Yep. I actually get my most direct feedback, and Francesca knows this, from my mother and father, who will march right up to me and give me very specific feedback. My father is always complimentary, and my mother gives it to me straight. And then I always make sure here at Opera San Antonio that I'm visible in the audience, pre, during, and post show. And people are no holds barred. They really are. I get a lot of feedback right away from a lot of different perspectives, and I value that. I mean, I have to know what my audience is thinking. It's about what Cheska's talking about, building a bridge. I have to learn how they're responding to pieces, for better or for worse, and use that to move my company forward in the future.
Well, I'm just saying this because this question crosses my mind hundreds of times during an ordinary season. People have their reactions, and sometimes they really can't handle something.
Yeah.
And sometimes I find myself drawn to say to them, I really hear what you're saying. We're going to try to do this differently. And other times I find myself saying, try seeing this again and see if, now that you have a different way to think, you might see it in a different way. I mean, years ago, we did our first Dialogues of the Carmelites in Fort Worth, and more than half of the audience was gone before it was over.
Wow.
But a lot of them came back a second time to see if they liked it better. Now that blew my mind, because I think that it was because one of the nuns had gotten drunk, and there was an article in the Fort Worth paper that said "nun in the slammer," because she'd been at a party afterwards. And I think that made people get a lot more interested in the Dialogues of the Carmelites. So you never know what it's going to take to bring people into seats. But I know we all want not only to have people into seats, but to actually communicate with them and have them leave those seats feeling a little bit differently than they'd ever felt before, which is what I hear you saying you're trying to do down there.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a piece of art, a piece of theater that I've encountered where there isn't some way to interpret or question the human nature and the themes of the piece as they affect us. I mean, that's how I look at pieces as a director. It's my direct response to telling the story and to bringing characters to life. Rare for me is a piece where I just go, oh, that's, fluff and wasn't that lovely. I think there are always kernels and nuggets of things that we learn when we go and have that magical experience of sitting in the theater together, watching artists on stage and in the pit create something that washes over us, and we have that bond from audience to artist that's invaluable for how we interpret who we are as humans, and that carries out into the rest of our lives and our communities. That I think is the power of art, really.
So does anybody in our last minutes want to tell us what you're hoping to see in the next couple of years, besides us being all able to get back into theaters, as far as a direction for opera in this country?
I'll jump in just real quick. I'm hoping to see more women in positions of power and influence. So I'm just so inspired by the three of you here, not just amazing artists, but also taking on that role as, someone who has control over what we're seeing on the stage, and who's I imagine like opening that up. Just from my own experience, all my early commissions came from women in positions of power. So it was Cheska, Beth Morrison, and those were really the two who gave me my first two opera commissions. And so I just think there's an inevitable opening up when you have more diversity in places of power.
Yes.
I think it's a complex thing, and I think that all of us on this panel would totally agree. What we want to see in the next decade is true equality in the profession, gender, race, in the power positions. And sometimes that means, how do we pull along the financial sector that accompanies it? I mean, there's no question. We know that, opera suffers from systemic racism. It suffers from, sexual discrimination, that is the nature of it. But it also has this incredible unleashing power. And so for us, I know we're all change makers and working on it, it's going to be, how do we put those systems in place? Not just like now, like, oh, that was great, but it's an investment in the future. Like, it doesn't mean just, I get really frustrated with some colleagues who say, oh, well, we did that opera and, we had a female conductor, or we had, a really diverse cast. And I'm like, yeah, but like, you're supposed to do it all the time. It's not supposed to be like a special event. That is like how you're supposed to plan for 3 years, 5 years out. And you're supposed to mentor the people. You're supposed to put them in your young artist program. You're supposed to put them in your, like the ASM position. That's what it's about. And so that also means that you find, now really being brutal, it's like you have to find the money to support those systems. And that is, I'll be honest, that's difficult sometimes. Yeah, of course, there are important foundations like, the Mellon or the Ford, but really finding donors who believe in those things and who invest in it for the future. And that to me has really been, that's the thing that I always think about, is like, how can we have mass mentoring, mass change within the business? And I'm, these are things that I'm always grappling with. And it's funny, and then I'll shush, is like when Karen was talking about Santa Fe in that summer, I was like, when John Crosby hired me for the first time to direct there in 1990, Santa Fe was traditionally a bastion of, it's like there wasn't like a strong female presence there. But I remember working there and feeling like, oh, change is possible, in this kind of situation. And I think that each of us have experienced change making in our own degree. So that's my hope for the next decade.
Yeah. For me personally, I have two things. I would love to see more diversity in new works, diverse casting in new works. I love that that Talise did Ma, because I was like, oh, well, is Ma supposed to be Black, or wait a minute, she's supposed to be mixed? Because Talise, while she's not mixed, she's very, on stage, she can be ambiguous, her race, So, but I want to see more of that. Like, I want to do stories about Black queer women. Like, where is that opera? I got two ideas, but where is that opera? I'm like, where does that represent that presence in new works? So that's important to me, but definitely diversity in new works without that being the issue. Like, oh, this has to be a Black character or a Latin character or Asian. Like, I would love to see more of that. And I think that audiences want to see more of that in the stories.
For the future, I want to know what Karen's brewing, first and foremost.
Yeah, that got my attention too.
So ding, 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 Karen, noted. But I would certainly echo the sentiments of all of my colleagues, which is just really thinking outside the box on how to push the industry forward, how to look at that in terms of equality, as Francesca has so brilliantly stated, and also look at that in terms of balancing new works and traditional works, and really being able to carve a new future, because we are in a time where we're all having, as artists or administrators, to sit down and reevaluate what it means to be really carrying this precious gift of opera forward. And maybe the revolution that we're in now will give us all impetus for excitement and change in order to do that.
I know we all hope that opera leads the world and changes the world. I think in a large way, what we're talking about is reflecting the world. And as long as we live in a world of systemic racism and lack of equality, opera is going to have that too. But one thing we haven't talked much about is education. And I know all of our companies have education programs, and kids are really the changers. The more that kids get out and see things that make them think differently about the world they're living in, the more we all have hope that in 25 or 50 years or whatever, this will all have happened, and people will look back on 2021 and say, wow, those people were really just so confused then. We hope that. Anyway, you're all so marvelous. I really appreciate every single one of you being here. And I hope everybody stays well and happy and sane, and that we just all keep going on doing our part in the opera world. And I hope that some of us will get to connect even in person in the near future. This is so great.
Well, thank you for the conversation, Joe, and thank you. I couldn't have arranged a better dinner party than with you all. I mean,
except the one where we'd actually be together.
Right.
I know. I have a 12-year-old. Like, I promised meatballs tonight, so it's like tonight is like Italian pasta night. So I wish everybody was coming over for dinner.
Well,
Take a rain check, though.
Yeah, we'll take that rain check.
Yeah, this was wonderful. So nice to be with you all.
Really delightful. Thank you, Joe, for having all of us.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you,
great
everybody.
to see all of you.
Likewise. Ciao.
Okay. See you soon.
Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thanks for joining us for Fort Worth Opera Salon. If you like what you heard and you want more, please consider making a donation to support Fort Worth Opera and all the work we do to bring opera to North Texas and directly to you through our new digital initiatives, like this podcast. Text FWO 2021 to 44321 or visit our website, www.fwopera.org, to make a donation. If you'd like to send us a message with topics you'd like to hear more about or questions for our guests, please email salon@fwopera.org and be sure to follow us on social media at Fort Worth Opera to find out about the next episode of Fort Worth Opera Salon. See y'all later.